The ghost ship emerges. The warning lights began flashing across every monitoring station in the outer sectors of Krellin space. Officer Nalrix had been stationed at Outpost 73 for nearly 8 standard cycles, and in all that time, nothing unusual had ever happened. The outpost was essentially a retirement position, a quiet place where aging officers could finish their careers in peace. The Krellin Empire controlled this region of space so thoroughly that threats simply did not exist here. Every merchant vessel, every transport ship, every military patrol was accounted for and tracked. The system was perfect, which made what Nalrix was seeing on his screen completely impossible. The sensor array had picked up something approaching from deep space. The contact was moving at speeds that should have been impossible for any known vessel. The energy signature was unlike anything in the Krellin database, and that database contained information on every spacefaring civilization in this quadrant of the galaxy. Nalrix rubbed his eyes with 2 of his 4 hands, thinking perhaps fatigue was causing him to misread the data. He had pulled a double shift because his replacement had called in sick. Maybe the long hours were affecting his judgment. He ran a full diagnostic on the sensor equipment, checking every circuit and every connection. The results came back clean. The equipment was functioning perfectly. The mysterious contact continued its approach, maintaining a steady course directly toward the heart of Krellin territory. Nalrix felt his secondary heart begin to race, something that only happened when his body sensed genuine danger. He activated the emergency communication channel to the regional defense coordinator. The holographic image of Commander Thexus appeared before him, looking annoyed at being disturbed during the night cycle. Thexus was a decorated military officer with scales that had turned silver with age, a sign of many years of distinguished service. He had fought in the border wars decades ago and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. Commander. Thexus listened to Nalrix's report with growing skepticism. A single unidentified vessel, approaching at impossible speeds with unknown energy signatures, sounded like the kind of sensor glitch that happened occasionally in aging equipment. Outpost 73 was scheduled for an upgrade next cycle, and Thexus made a mental note to push that schedule forward. However, protocol demanded that any unidentified contact be investigated, regardless of how unlikely the report seemed. Thexus ordered Nalrix to transmit all available data to Central Command and to continue monitoring the contact. He also dispatched a patrol squadron to intercept and identify the vessel, expecting them to find nothing more than a malfunctioning cargo hauler, or perhaps a small asteroid that was confusing the sensors. The patrol squadron consisted of 6 heavy cruisers, each one a masterpiece of Krellin military engineering. These ships had been designed to project power across star systems, to intimidate rivals, and to crush any resistance from lesser civilizations. The squadron commander was Captain Vexrol, a young officer eager to prove himself worthy of higher command. He saw this assignment as routine, perhaps even boring, but he approached it with professional diligence. His ships formed a standard intercept formation and accelerated toward the coordinates Nalrix had provided. As they closed the distance, their own sensors began picking up the mysterious contact, and Captain Vexrol felt his confidence waver slightly. The readings made no sense whatsoever. The vessel was massive, easily twice the size of a Krellin battleship, but it was moving with the agility of a fighter craft. The power output suggested weapon systems that could rival an entire battle group, and the energy shield surrounding the ship was denser than anything Krellin science had ever produced. Vexril ordered his communications officer to transmit a standard hailing message on all known frequencies. The message identified them as representatives of the Krellin Empire, demanded that the unknown vessel identify itself, state its purpose, and explain why it was entering restricted space without authorization. The message was transmitted in 17 different languages, covering every major civilization in the known galaxy. No response came back. The mysterious ship continued its approach without any change in speed or direction. It was as if the crew either could not hear the transmissions or simply chose to ignore them. Vexril tried again, this time adding that failure to respond would be considered a hostile act and would result in defensive action. Still nothing. The silence was somehow more frightening than any threat could have been. Vexril felt sweat forming on his scaled skin, despite the perfectly controlled temperature on his bridge. He had a terrible feeling that something was very wrong, that his squadron was facing something beyond their understanding or capability. Then the unknown vessel finally responded, but not with words. Every communication system in the squadron suddenly activated simultaneously, overriding their security protocols, as if those protections simply did not exist. A voice came through the speakers, speaking in perfect Krellan language, with no accent or hesitation. The voice belonged to a male, and it carried a cold, controlled anger that made every officer who heard it feel ran down their spine. The speaker identified himself as Commander James Mitchell of the Earth Defense Force, captain of the warship Vengeance. He stated that his vessel was on a direct course to Krellan Prime, the Empire's capital world, and that nothing would stop him from reaching his destination. Commander Mitchell continued speaking, his words measured and deliberate. He explained that 4 standard cycles ago, a Krellan military task force had discovered a small human colony. On the planet designated as Talon 4, the colony was composed of approximately 8,000 civilians who had settled on what they believed was an unclaimed world. These were farmers, scientists, teachers, and families who wanted to build a new life far from the crowded core worlds of human space. They had no military presence, no weapons beyond basic tools, and no political affiliations with any major power. The Krellan Task Force, led by Fleet Admiral Korith, had decided that human presence in that region was unacceptable. Without any attempt at communication or negotiation, they had bombarded the planet from orbit until every structure was destroyed and every living thing was dead. The galaxy fell silent as the transmission continued. Mitchell stated that Earth had sent diplomatic envoys to demand justice, to request that Admiral Korith and his officers be turned over to stand trial for the massacre. The Krellan government, led by Supreme Leader Valorix, had refused. They claimed the colony was in violation of territorial boundaries, that the humans were trespassers, and that the Krellan military had acted within their rights to defend Imperial space. Mitchell's voice grew harder as he spoke. He said that Earth had waited an entire cycle for the Krellan Empire to reconsider, to show any sign of remorse or willingness to make amends. That time was over. The Vengeance had been authorized to extract justice by any means necessary. Yet Captain Vexril felt his blood run cold. He knew about the Talon 4 incident. It had been classified as a routine border action, the kind of minor military operation that happened occasionally when dealing with expansionist species. The official reports described it as a necessary show of force, a warning to other civilizations that Krellan space was inviolable. Nobody had mentioned that the targets were unarmed civilians. Nobody had said anything about 8,000 dead. Vexril realized with growing horror that his empire, the civilization he had sworn to defend, had committed an atrocity and then hidden it behind classified reports and official denials. Mitchell concluded his transmission with a final statement. The Krellan Empire had one last opportunity to avoid further bloodshed. They could surrender Admiral Korith and the 17 officers who had participated in the Talon 4 massacre. These individuals would be taken to Earth to stand trial for crimes against humanity. If the Empire complied, Mitchell would leave peacefully and no further action would be taken. However, if they refused, if they chose to protect war criminals rather than face justice, then Mitchell would reach Krellan Prime and take what Earth demanded by force. The Empire had exactly one standard cycle to make their decision. The transmission ended. leaving Vexrol's squadron in stunned silence. Asterisk Commander Thexus, monitoring the situation from regional headquarters, immediately forwarded the transmission to Central Command on Krellin Prime. Within minutes, it had reached the highest levels of Imperial government. Supreme Leader Valorix convened an emergency council meeting, gathering his top military advisors and political officials. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some argued for immediate compliance, pointing out that sacrificing 18 officers was better than risking a war with an unknown enemy. Others insisted that surrendering to threats would destroy the Empire's credibility and encourage other civilizations to make similar demands. Valorix himself was adamant that the Krellin Empire would not bow to intimidation from any species, especially not from humans. Asterisk. The humans were known to the Krellin Empire, but only barely. Historical records showed that humanity was a relatively young spacefaring civilization that had expanded slowly and cautiously into nearby star systems. They had established peaceful trade relations with several minor powers, but had avoided contact with major empires like the Krellins. Intelligence assessments described humans as technologically competent, but not exceptional, militarily adequate for self-defense, but not capable of projecting power across interstellar distances. The idea that a single human warship could threaten the mighty Krellin Empire seemed absurd. Valorix ordered his military to treat the situation as they would any other act of piracy or terrorism. The human ship would be destroyed, and humanity would learn the cost of threatening their betters. Fleet. Admiral Crexus received the order to intercept and destroy the Vengeance. He assembled a battle group of 30 warships, including 3 of the Empire's most powerful dreadnoughts. This force represented enough firepower to conquer small star systems. Crexus was certain that whatever tricks this human vessel possessed, whatever technology gave it those impressive sensor readings, it could not possibly withstand concentrated fire from 30 Krellin warships. He positioned his forces along the most direct route to Krellin Prime and waited for the Vengeance to arrive. His crews were veterans, his ships were well maintained, and his tactical position was sound. He expected a short engagement followed by a glorious victory. The Vengeance appeared exactly where Crexus had predicted, emerging from faster-than-light travel with perfect precision. For a moment, the two forces simply observed each other across the empty void of space. The human warship was indeed massive, its hull a dark gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There were no visible weapon ports, no obvious weak points, nothing that suggested how it might fight. The design was utterly alien to Krellin military doctrine, which favored sleek, elegant vessels that displayed their power openly. This ship looked like something carved from a single piece of dense metal, all sharp angles and flat surfaces. It looked brutal and uncompromising. Admiral Crexus opened a communication channel, intending to give the human commander one final chance to surrender. Before he could speak, the Vengeance opened fire. There was no warning, no preliminary exchange of threats, no posturing. The human ship simply attacked with devastating efficiency. Weapons that Crexus could not even identify tore through his formation. Beams of coherent energy punched through shields and armor as if they were not there. Missiles that moved faster than anything in Krellin arsenals struck with pinpoint accuracy. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to impossible velocities, turned proud warships into expanding clouds of debris. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than 3 minutes. 27 Krellin warships were destroyed outright, their crews killed instantly when their vessels were torn apart. 3 ships survived with critical damage, their hulls breached and systems failing. Admiral Crexus himself was among the survivors, trapped in the damaged bridge of his flagship as life support began to fail. He sent one final transmission to Krellin Prime, his voice filled with pain and disbelief. He reported that the human vessel possessed technology far beyond anything the Empire had encountered. He stated that conventional military force would not stop this ship, that trying to fight it with traditional tactics would result only in more deaths. He recommended immediate compliance with the human demands. Then his transmission cut off, as his flagship lost all power. The Vengeance did not pursue the damaged ships or finish off the survivors. It simply continued on its original course toward Krellin Prime, leaving the wreckage behind. The message was clear. Commander Mitchell had not come to conquer or to wage war against the Krellin people. He had come for specific individuals, and he would not be stopped by military force. The Empire now faced a choice that would determine not just the fate of 18 officers, but potentially the survival of their entire civilization. The cycle that Mitchell had given them was ticking away, and with each passing hour, the Vengeance drew closer to the heart of the Empire. Asterisk. No mercy for the guilty. The news of Admiral Crexus's defeat spread through the Krellin Empire like wildfire. Military channels buzzed with encrypted transmissions, each one more desperate than the last. Civilian networks picked up fragments of information, leading to widespread panic across multiple worlds. People who had lived their entire lives believing in the invincibility of their empire suddenly faced the terrifying reality that something out there was stronger. The Krellin military, which had spent centuries projecting an image of absolute dominance, now scrambled to reorganize their forces and develop new strategies against an enemy. They did not understand that Supreme Leader Valorix convened another emergency session of his War Council. The chamber was filled with his most trusted advisors, military commanders, and political officials. The atmosphere was tense, with several council members openly arguing for immediate compliance with the human demands. General Thrax, commander of the Home Defense Forces, presented a detailed analysis of the engagement that had destroyed Crexus's battle group. The data was sobering. The human warship had demonstrated weapons technology at least 2 centuries ahead of Krellin capabilities. Its defensive shields had not even been tested, because Krellin forces had been destroyed before they could mount any effective offense. Every tactical simulation run by military computers showed the same result. Any conventional military engagement would end in total defeat. Valorix listened to these reports with growing frustration. He was an old leader who had spent decades building his power and authority. His rule was based on strength, on the principle that the Krellin Empire answered to no one. To surrender officers of his military to an alien power would be seen as weakness, and weakness would invite challenges to his leadership. He had political enemies within the Empire who would use such a surrender as evidence that he was unfit to rule. Yet the alternative was allowing a single enemy vessel to penetrate to the heart of Krellin space and potentially threaten their homeworld. Either choice carried enormous risks to his position and to the Empire itself. While the Council debated, far from Krellin Prime on a distant world, a group of survivors from Talon 4 massacre lived with their memories. Not all the humans on that colony world had died in the orbital bombardment. A small research team had been working in deep underground caves when the attack began. They had survived the initial assault by pure chance, protected by hundreds of meters of solid rock. When they finally emerged 3 days later, they found their entire world destroyed. Every building was rubble. Every field was scorched earth. Every person they had known was dead. The survivors numbered only 43 souls, and they carried the trauma of that day like an open wound. Commander James Mitchell had met with those survivors. Before embarking on his mission, he had looked into their eyes and seen the pain, the loss, the desperate need for someone to acknowledge what had been done to them. Among the survivors was a young woman named Sarah Torres, who had lost her husband and 2 children in the bombardment. She had told Mitchell about her family, about the life they were building, about the dreams that had been incinerated in moments. She had asked him only one thing: make them answer for it. Make them understand that human lives matter. Mitchell had made her a promise that day, a promise he intended to keep no matter what the cost. The Vengeance continued its approach to Krellin Prime, moving through space with relentless purpose. Mitchell stood on the bridge of his vessel, surrounded by crew members who shared his determination. Every person on this ship had volunteered for the mission, knowing they might not return. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, people who understood the value of the lives that had been taken. The ship's artificial intelligence, called Athena, monitored thousands of systems simultaneously and kept Mitchell informed of every development. Athena reported that Krellin forces were massing at their homeworld, pulling ships from across their empire to create one massive defensive fleet. The Krellin military had assembled over 400 warships around their capital world. Every available vessel had been called back from patrol duties, from garrison assignments, from diplomatic missions. This represented the largest concentration of military power the Empire had ever gathered in one location. Defensive satellites orbited the planet in multiple layers, each one armed with weapons designed to destroy incoming threats. Planetary shield generators on the surface stood ready to project protective barriers over major cities. Ground-based missile batteries waited to launch interceptors. The Krellin military command believed that even if this human ship was technologically superior, it could not possibly overcome such overwhelming numbers. Asterisk. Supreme Leader Valorix addressed his people through a galaxy-wide broadcast. He stood before cameras wearing his ceremonial armor, projecting strength and confidence. He told his citizens that the Empire faced a terrorist threat from a rogue human vessel, but that their mighty military would protect them. He described the humans as a primitive species that had gotten lucky in one engagement, but would soon learn the price of attacking the Krellin Empire. He promised that the threat would be eliminated within the cycle and that the Empire would emerge stronger than ever. His speech was designed to calm fears and rally support, but those who listened carefully could hear the uncertainty beneath his confident words. As the deadline Mitchell had given approached its final hours, a faction within the Krellin government made one last desperate attempt to change Valorix's mind. Minister Alvarix, who oversaw diplomatic relations, brought forth evidence that had been suppressed after the Talon 4 incident. He presented classified reports showing that Krellin intelligence had known the colony was civilian. They had known there were families there, children, people who posed no military threat. Admiral Korath had requested authorization to destroy the colony anyway, claiming it would send a message to other species about respecting Krellin borders. Valorix himself had approved the action, signing the order without hesitation. Alvarix argued that the Empire had committed a grave crime, that 8,000 innocent deaths could not be dismissed as a routine military action. He pointed out that by protecting Korath and refusing to face justice, they were essentially admitting guilt while still refusing responsibility. He suggested that surrendering the guilty parties might actually strengthen the Empire's position, showing other civilizations that Krellin was mature enough to hold its own people accountable. Valorix listened to this argument with growing anger. When Alvarix finished speaking, Valorix had him arrested for treason and sedition. The message to the rest of the council was clear. There would be no surrender, no compromise, no admission of wrongdoing. The Vengeance arrived at Krellin Prime exactly one standard cycle after Mitchell's initial warning. The massive human warship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, well within detection range of every sensor in the region. Mitchell opened a final communication channel, broadcasting on every frequency. His voice reached every ship, every station, every home in the Krellin system. He stated that the deadline had passed without compliance. He noted that the Krellin Empire had chosen to protect war criminals rather than face justice. Therefore, Earth would take what it demanded by force. He gave one final warning for all civilian vessels to leave the area and for all non-combatants to seek shelter. What happened next would be on Valerix's conscience, not his. The Krellin fleet moved to intercept. 400 warships formed a defensive wall between the Vengeance and their homeworld. Fleet Admiral Nexer commanded this armada from his flagship, a super dreadnought called the Eternal Glory. Nexer was considered the finest military mind in the Empire, a strategist who had won battles through clever tactics and careful planning. He had positioned his forces in overlapping fields of fire, created fallback positions, established communication networks, and prepared contingency plans for every scenario his staff could imagine. He believed that while the human ship was powerful, no single vessel could defeat an entire empire's military. The battle began when Nexer gave the order to fire. 400 warships opened up simultaneously, unleashing a storm of energy weapons, missiles, and kinetic projectiles. The combined firepower was enough to crack continents and boil oceans. The space between the two forces lit up like a newborn star as countless weapons discharged at once. Every sensor in the system was momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer energy output. For a few seconds, it seemed impossible that anything could survive such an onslaught. Then the sensors cleared, and the Krellin military saw something that shattered their confidence completely. The Vengeance was undamaged, its shields having absorbed the entire assault without even flickering. Mitchell did not hesitate or gloat. He simply returned fire. The Vengeance possessed weapon systems that Earth scientists had developed specifically for this mission. Particle beam cannons that could atomize matter at the molecular level. Plasma torpedoes that burned hotter than stellar cores. Graviton disruptors that could tear ships apart by manipulating local spacetime. Railguns that launched projectiles at relativistic speeds. Each weapon had been designed with one purpose in mind: to ensure that no military force in the galaxy could stop humanity from protecting its own. The Krellin fleet began to die. Ships that had served the Empire for decades were reduced to expanding gas clouds in seconds. Dreadnoughts that had inspired fear across star systems were cut in half by weapons they could not defend against. Crews that had trained for years died before they understood what was happening to them. Admiral Nexer watched in horror as his carefully planned formation disintegrated. His tactical displays showed ship after ship winking out of existence. His communication channels, filled with screams and desperate pleas for orders that could not save anyone. Nexer tried everything he could think of. He ordered ships to scatter and attack from multiple angles, but the Vengeance tracked and destroyed targets with perfect accuracy, regardless of their approach vector. He commanded suicide runs where damaged ships attempted to ram the human vessel, but they were destroyed before they could close the distance. He deployed every missile, every mine, every weapon in his arsenal. Nothing worked. The human ship moved through his fleet like a blade through tall grass, cutting down everything in its path with mechanical efficiency. The planetary defense systems opened fire when the Vengeance moved within range. Hundreds of orbital platforms unleashed their weapons, adding their firepower to the desperate battle. Ground-based missile batteries launched interceptors by the thousands. The planetary shields activated, creating glowing barriers over major population centers. For a brief moment, it seemed like the combined might of all these systems might slow the human ship down. Then the Vengeance demonstrated capabilities that went beyond simple superior firepower. The ship deployed smaller craft, drone vessels that swarmed around it like insects defending a hive. These drones moved with impossible agility, destroying orbital platforms with precise strikes. The main ship fired a weapon that no one in Krellin space had ever seen before. A beam of purple energy struck the planetary shield generators, and instead of attempting to overwhelm them with brute force, it simply disrupted the quantum field that made the shields possible. The protective barriers around cities flickered and vanished. The shield generators themselves overloaded and exploded, leaving Krellin Prime defenseless. Panic spread through the population as they realized their military could not protect them. Cities that had stood for thousands of years now lay exposed to attack from orbit. But Mitchell did not bombard cities. He did not target civilians. Instead, the Vengeance moved into low orbit directly above the Imperial Palace, where Supreme Leader Valorix ruled. Mitchell opened one final communication channel, this one directed specifically at the Krellin leader. His voice was cold and hard as he spoke. He stated that Valorix had one final opportunity to surrender. Admiral Korath and the other officers responsible for the Talon 4 massacre. If Valorix refused, Mitchell would target the Imperial Palace itself. He would not destroy it from orbit. Instead, he would send soldiers to extract the guilty parties by force, and anyone who stood in their way would be treated as an accomplice to war crimes. Valorix stood in his throne room, surrounded by what remained of his guards and advisors. Through the windows, he could see the human warship hanging in the sky like a dark moon. His military was shattered, his defenses were breached, his people were terrified. Everything he had built, every illusion of power and invincibility, had been destroyed in less than 3 hours. He finally understood what Mitchell had been trying to tell him from the beginning. This was not about military conquest or political domination. This was about justice, and justice could not be bargained with or intimidated. He had one choice left, and the weight of that choice pressed down on him like gravity itself. Admiral Korath himself stood nearby, his face pale with fear. The officer who had so casually ordered the death of 8,000 civilians now faced the consequences of his actions. He pleaded with Valorix to protect him, to continue fighting, to do anything except hand him over to the humans. Other officers who had participated in the Talon 4 massacre added their voices to his. They argued that surrendering them would set a dangerous precedent, that it would encourage other species to demand similar accountability from the Empire. Valorix looked at these officers and saw them clearly for the first time. They were not brave warriors defending the Empire. They were criminals hiding behind their ranks and positions, willing to let millions of innocents die to protect themselves from facing what they had done. Valorix made his decision. He ordered his guards to arrest Admiral Korath and the 17 other officers who had participated in the massacre. The arrests happened quickly, with the accused officers being stripped of their ranks and placed in restraints. Valorix then contacted Commander Mitchell and informed him that the Empire would comply with his demands. The guilty parties would be surrendered, and reparations would be negotiated for the families of the victims. Mitchell acknowledged the message and provided coordinates for the handover. The transfer happened within the hour, with Krellin shuttles carrying the arrested officers to the Vengeance dot as the shuttles docked with the human warship. Mitchell recorded a final message to the Krellin people. He explained that humanity had not come to conquer or to humiliate. They had come because justice demanded it, because 8,000 lives could not be dismissed as acceptable losses in someone else's political games. He stated that the officers being taken into custody would receive fair trials on Earth, that they would be given opportunities to defend themselves, and that the proceedings would be open to observers from any civilization that wished to attend. This was not revenge, he insisted. This was accountability. The Vengeance departed Krellin space the same day, carrying its prisoners back to Earth for trial. Behind it, the Krellin Empire began the difficult process of recovering from the encounter. The military losses were staggering, with estimates suggesting it would take decades to rebuild their fleet. The political damage was perhaps even worse, as Valorix's authority had been severely undermined by his inability to protect his own officers. Reform movements that had been suppressed for years suddenly found their voices, demanding changes to how the Empire conducted itself. On Earth, the survivors of Talon 4 received notification that justice was coming. Sarah Torres, who had lost everything in the bombardment, broke down crying when she heard the news. For 4 cycles, She had lived with the belief that no one cared about what had happened to her family, that the powerful could murder the weak without consequences. Now she knew differently. Humanity had crossed the stars themselves to prove that every human life mattered, that crimes against their people would not go unanswered. It did not bring back her husband or children, but it gave her something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. Commander Mitchell stood on the bridge of the Vengeance as his ship made the journey home. He thought about the thousands of Krellin soldiers who had died in the battle, people who were likely just following orders from superiors they trusted. He felt no satisfaction in their deaths, only a grim acknowledgement that sometimes the price of justice was paid in blood. He thought about Sarah Torres and the other survivors, about whether what he had done would truly help them heal. He thought about the message this mission sent to the galaxy, that humanity would protect its own, no matter the cost or the distance. The galaxy would indeed remember this day. News of the engagement spread to every spacefaring civilization within weeks. The story varied depending on who told it, but certain facts remained consistent. A single human warship had penetrated to the heart of a major empire, defeated their entire military, and extracted justice from murdered civilians. Some species saw this as admirable, as proof that even smaller civilizations could stand up to larger powers if they had the will and capability. Others saw it as terrifying, as evidence that humanity possessed military technology far beyond what they had revealed, and were willing to use it without hesitation. Diplomatic relationships shifted across the galaxy. Several civilizations that had been considering aggressive actions against human colonies quietly abandoned those plans. Others reached out to Earth seeking alliances or trade agreements, hoping to avoid ever facing human wrath themselves. The Galactic Council initiated discussions about establishing clearer protocols for justice when crimes crossed species boundaries. The Krellin Empire, diminished but not destroyed, began internal reforms aimed at preventing future atrocities. On Talon 4, where 8,000 humans had died 4 cycles earlier, a memorial was eventually constructed. The survivors returned to place markers for their loved ones, to remember the lives that had been lived and lost. Among those markers was one for Sarah Torres' family. She stood before it in the quiet afternoon, feeling the breeze that blew across the recovering world. The planet would never be the same, but life was slowly returning. Grass grew where bombs had fallen. Birds sang in newly planted trees. The dead could not return, but the living could rebuild and remember. Commander Mitchell attended the memorial ceremony, standing quietly among the survivors. He did not make speeches or accept honors. He simply stood as a witness, acknowledging that the mission had been completed, but the cost would never be forgotten. When Sarah Torres approached him, she did not offer thanks or praise. She simply said that her children's names were remembered, that their deaths had meaning, that someone had cared enough to cross the stars, seeking justice on their behalf. Mitchell nodded, understanding that nothing he could say would truly address the magnitude of her loss. The Vengeance eventually returned to its home port, its mission complete. The warship would remain in service, a symbol of Earth's capability and commitment to protecting its citizens wherever they might be. The trials of Admiral Korath and his officers proceeded as promised, with representatives from dozens civilizations observing. The proceedings were thorough and fair, giving the accused every opportunity to present their defense. In the end, all were found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to lengthy imprisonment. The trials set precedents that would influence galactic law for generations. Years later, historians would debate whether Mitchell's actions were justified, whether the cost in Krellin lives was proportionate to the crime being avenged. Philosophers would argue about the ethics of might making right, about whether superior technology gave humanity the moral authority to enforce their concept of justice on other civilizations. Politicians would use the incident to support various arguments about military preparedness, diplomatic engagement, and interstellar relations. But for the survivors of Talon 4, for the families who lost loved ones, the answer was simple. Someone had cared. Someone had acted. Someone had proven that their lives mattered enough to fight for, even against impossible odds. The galaxy had learned the lesson that day, one that would not be forgotten. Humanity, despite being relatively new to the galactic stage, despite lacking the ancient histories and vast territories of older civilizations, was not to be trifled with. They protected their own with absolute commitment. They possessed technology that could challenge any military force. And most importantly, they were willing to use that power when justice demanded it. Other species might be stronger, older, or more numerous, but humanity had proven something that struck fear into the hearts of potential aggressors. They had proven that they would never accept the murder of their people as an acceptable cost of someone else's political ambitions. The message was clear. Attack humans at your own risk, because humanity would answer crimes against their people with merciless determination. No distance was too far, no enemy too powerful, no cost too high when it came to protecting their own. Asterisk.